A chance encounter with danger leads to an offer so life-changing that not even the wealthiest can see coming. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cracked sidewalks of Central City. The air was thick with the distant sounds of sirens and the chatter of people moving through their daily routines. 7-year-old Marcus clutched the brown paper bag filled with groceries against his chest, his small frame barely visible beneath the oversized hoodie he wore. His grandmother had sent him to the corner store for milk, eggs, and bread, a task he had done many times before. He knew the streets, knew which corners to avoid, and which alleyways were shortcuts home. The neighborhood was rough, but it was home, and Marcus had learned to navigate it with sharp eyes and quick feet. As he turned onto a quieter street, something caught his attention. An orange glow flickered from the alley up ahead, the kind that didn't belong in the daylight. He slowed his steps, peering cautiously around the corner. Flames. A car was on fire, its front engulfed in roaring flames, thick black smoke curling into the sky. The acrid scent of burning metal and rubber filled his nose, making his eyes water. Marcus's first instinct was to back away, to turn and run. Fires weren't something he could fix. Fires were dangerous. Then he heard it. A voice. Faint, weak, but unmistakable. A cry for help. His heart slammed against his ribs as he realized. Someone was trapped inside. Marcus scanned the street. There were no adults nearby, no one running toward the fire, no sirens coming to the rescue. His hands tightened around the grocery bag as he hesitated, his mind screaming at him to go find help. But another voice, one inside him, told him there was no time. He dropped the bag and ran toward the burning car. Smoke stung his lungs as he neared the wreckage. Through the cracked windshield he could make out a figure slumped over the steering wheel. The man's face was barely visible through the haze, but his hand was weakly pressing against the glass. He was alive, but not for long. Marcus's small hands fumbled at the door handle, yanking with all his strength. It wouldn't budge. His heart pounded as he looked around, his eyes landing on a brick near the sidewalk. Without thinking, he grabbed it and smashed it against the window. Once, twice. The glass cracked, but didn't give. "Help!" the man inside rasped, his voice growing weaker. "Where are you watching from, and what time is it?" Marcus gritted his teeth and swung again. This time, the window shattered, shards falling inside. The heat was unbearable now, but Marcus didn't stop. He reached in, his arms barely able to stretch far enough to unbuckle the man's seatbelt. The man groaned as Marcus tugged at him, but he was too heavy, too weak to move on his own. Footsteps pounded against the pavement behind him. "Hey, get away from there!" a deep voice shouted. "Have you ever had to make a split-second decision? What did you do?" Marcus sprinted toward the burning vehicle, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst from his chest. The heat scorched his skin before he even reached the car, flames licking at the shattered windshield. Thick, black smoke curled into the sky, making it hard to see. He coughed, his small body trembling, but he couldn't stop, not when someone was trapped inside. Through the haze, he saw her. A white woman in an expensive outfit, her blonde hair messy and tangled against the steering wheel. She was unconscious, her face barely visible through the thickening smoke. Panic clawed at Marcus's throat as he tried the door handle, yanking with all his strength. It was jammed. "Come on! Come on!" he muttered, his voice cracking. The flames crept closer, spreading along the front of the car, threatening to consume it entirely. Marcus wiped his eyes, trying to keep himself focused. He spotted a loose metal pipe nearby and grabbed it. With every ounce of strength in his small body, he swung at the window. The glass cracked but didn't shatter. "Help! Somebody!" he shouted, but no one came. Smoke filled the car, choking the air. The woman's shallow breaths barely lifted her chest. He had no choice. He swung again, harder, and this time the window shattered, sending shards of glass cascading onto the seat. The woman coughed weakly but didn't move. "Come on!" "We have to go," he shouted, his voice hoarse. He reached inside, grabbing her arm, but she was limp, unresponsive. The heat was unbearable now, sweat dripping down his face, his lungs screaming for air. He braced his feet against the pavement and pulled with everything he had. His muscles strained, his hands shaking, but slowly, agonizingly, he managed to drag her across the seat and out through the shattered window. The moment her body hit the pavement, Marcus staggered back, his vision swimming. His head pounded, his lungs burned, but he kept going, pulling her as far away as he could. Then, boom! The explosion rocked the ground beneath him, sending a wave of heat and sparks into the night sky. The force knocked him off his feet, but he landed just out of reach of the flames. For a moment, there was only ringing in his ears, only the heavy weight of exhaustion pressing on his chest. Then he felt movement beside him. The woman gasped, sucking in fresh air as she coughed violently. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and filled with confusion. Slowly, she turned her head toward him. "Would you have done the same in Marcus's position? Let's talk." The woman coughed violently, her lungs fighting to pull in fresh air. Her once pristine dress was now covered in soot and ash, her hair tangled from the chaos. She blinked rapidly, trying to steady herself as reality sank in. She turned her head and saw him, the small boy who had just pulled her from certain death. Marcus stood a few feet away, his own body shaking, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. His hoodie, once a faded shade of blue, was now smeared with grime. Her lips parted, her voice barely above a whisper. You saved me." Marcus shifted uncomfortably under her wide-eyed stare. He had never expected thanks. He had acted without thinking, without considering anything but the need to get her out of that car. He shrugged, his voice quiet but steady. "You needed help?" The simplicity of his words made her heart tighten. Here she was, a woman of wealth and privilege, saved by a boy who looked like he had already seen too much of the world. Flashing red and blue lights painted the street as fire trucks and ambulances pulled up. The hiss of extinguishing foam filled the air as firefighters doused the burning wreckage. Bystanders gathered, murmuring amongst themselves, their faces filled with shock and awe. One of the paramedics rushed toward them, kneeling beside the woman. "Ma'am, are you injured?" he asked, his voice firm but kind. She barely heard him. Her mind was still reeling, her thoughts consumed by the small boy in front of her. Marcus stepped back as more emergency responders arrived, unsure of what to do next. He didn't belong in this scene of flashing lights and attention. He had done what needed to be done, and now he just wanted to go home. The woman reached for his wrist before he could leave. Her grip was weak but urgent. "Wait," she said, her voice stronger now. "What's your name?" Marcus hesitated. "Marcus." Her lips pressed together as she studied him. "Marcus," she repeated, almost as if committing it to memory. Then softly, almost to herself, she whispered, "I've never seen such bravery before." As the paramedics ushered her toward an ambulance, Marcus stood frozen. He didn't feel brave. He didn't feel like a hero. He had just done what was right. Why do you think acts of courage can come from unexpected places? Let's discuss. The next morning, Marcus woke up to the sound of voices outside his window. The usual quiet of his neighborhood had been replaced by murmurs, camera clicks, and excited chatter. He rubbed his eyes, still groggy from the night before. Everything felt like a blur. The fire, the woman, the explosion. He had barely slept, his mind racing with everything that had happened. He swung his legs over the bed and shuffled to the kitchen, where his grandmother sat at the table, her phone in hand. She looked up at him, her eyes full of something he couldn't quite place. Pride, concern, maybe both. "Baby, you're all over the news," she said, holding up her phone. Marcus blinked at the screen. His own face stared back at him. A shaky video, taken from across the street, played on a loop. Him running toward the burning car, breaking the window, dragging the woman to safety just before the explosion. The headline beneath it read, "7-year-old saves woman from fiery crash, a true hero." Marcus's stomach tightened. Hero. He hadn't done it to be a hero. "They got you on TV too," his grandmother continued, switching channels. The morning news anchors were discussing him now, their voices animated. Words like bravery, miracle, and extraordinary courage floated through the small apartment. Marcus sat down slowly. It was surreal hearing strangers talk about him like that. It didn't feel real. His grandmother placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, squeezing it softly. "People don't forget moments like this, baby. You did something good." Before Marcus could respond, a sudden knock at the door interrupted them. His grandmother raised an eyebrow, glancing at the clock. It was too early for visitors. She wiped her hands on her apron before making her way to the door, but Marcus beat her to it. His heart pounded as he hesitated for a second, then unlocked it and pulled it open. Standing outside was a tall, well-dressed man holding a sleek leather briefcase. His suit was crisp, his shoes shined, and his face unreadable. But Marcus barely noticed him. His eyes were drawn to the person standing just behind him, the woman from last night. She looked different, clean, composed, her hair neatly styled, her clothes immaculate. But her expression was unreadable. Her eyes met his, and for a moment she just stared, as if taking him in all over again. There was something in her gaze that Marcus couldn't quite place. Gratitude, maybe something more. Then she spoke. "We need to talk." Marcus glanced back at his grandmother, who gave him a reassuring nod before stepping forward to open the door wider. "Come in," she said, her voice warm but cautious. The man and the woman stepped inside, their polished shoes contrasting sharply with the worn wooden floor. The air in the room shifted, the weight of something unknown settling in. The woman cleared her throat, her voice softer now. "Marcus, I don't think you understand how much you changed my life last night. And I don't think you understand how much the world is watching you right now." Marcus's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't thought about it that way. The man opened his briefcase, pulling out a folder. "We have an opportunity for you. Something that could change everything." Marcus glanced at his grandmother, unsure of what to say. Whatever this was, it felt big. "What do you think they want? Drop your predictions." Marcus sat across from the woman, his small hands gripping the edge of his seat. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, making his chest feel tight. His grandmother sat beside him, her expression unreadable, as she listened carefully. The well-dressed man placed a leather briefcase on the table, but Marcus's eyes remained on the woman, Evelyn Sinclair. Her name had been all over the news for years. Heiress to the Sinclair business empire, a woman whose family controlled industries across the country. And yet, Here she was, sitting in their tiny apartment, looking at Marcus as if he was the one who had the power. "My family owes you a debt we can never repay," she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "You saved my life, Marcus. And for that, I want to do something for you." She reached into a sleek envelope and slid a piece of paper across the table. Marcus hesitated before picking it up, his eyes widening as he read the words printed in elegant script. A full scholarship. Paid tuition to one of the most prestigious private schools in the city, a place where children of politicians, CEOs, and celebrities studied. He swallowed hard. "For me?" Evelyn nodded. "I want to give you the chance to go to the best school, to have the best education, to never have to worry about opportunities. You deserve that." Marcus felt his grandmother's warm hand squeeze his shoulder. He could tell she was overwhelmed, just like he was. But before he could even find the words to thank her, Evelyn continued. "But that's not all," she said, leaning forward. "I don't just want to help you. I want you to help me." Marcus blinked, confused. "Help you? How?" She exchanged a look with the man beside her, who finally opened the briefcase. Inside was another set of documents, far thicker than the scholarship letter. Evelyn's tone shifted, more serious now. "My family is powerful, Marcus. And because of that, everything we do is calculated. People expect us to be cold, disconnected. But you—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You changed the way people see me. You changed my family's image overnight." Marcus didn't fully understand, but he could sense where this was going. "What are you saying?" his grandmother asked, her voice calm but firm. Evelyn folded her hands together. "I want to bring Marcus into our world, not just as a student at a prestigious school, but as someone who represents the future. We want him to be a part of something bigger, to stand beside us." Marcus felt the weight of her words. This wasn't just about a scholarship. It was about something much larger. "You're asking for more than just helping him," his grandmother said carefully. "What exactly do you want him to do?" Evelyn sighed. "I want him to be a symbol, a representation of hope, of change. My family needs a new face to show the world. And Marcus," she met his eyes, "people already see you as a hero." Silence filled the room as Marcus tried to process everything. He had only done what was right. He had never asked for attention, never wanted anything in return. But now, he was being offered a future most kids could only dream of, at a cost he didn't fully understand yet. "You don't have to decide now," Evelyn added. "But think about it. This could change your life." Marcus looked at his grandmother, searching for an answer in her eyes. But even she seemed unsure. "Would you accept the offer? Why or why not?" "Let's discuss." Marcus stared at the papers on the table, the words swimming in his vision. His hands clenched into fists as he tried to process everything Evelyn Sinclair had just said. A full scholarship. A future he had never even dared to imagine. But also something more, something deeper. His grandmother sat beside him, her fingers gripping the hem of her dress, her face unreadable. He turned to her, searching for a sign, some kind of reassurance, but she remained quiet, letting him make his own choice. "I'm just a kid," Marcus finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What could I do for you?" Evelyn leaned forward, her gaze steady. "You saved my life. Now, I want you by my side, to show the world that courage isn't about wealth, it's about heart." Marcus swallowed. It sounded noble, but he wasn't sure what it meant for him. He wasn't like the polished kids on TV, the ones who spoke with practiced confidence. shaking hands with important people. He was just a boy from a small apartment in Central City. He had gone to the store for groceries. That was all. Yet here he was, facing the biggest decision of his life. "You don't have to answer now," Evelyn continued. "Take some time to think about it. Talk it over with your grandmother. This is your choice, Marcus, no one else's." Marcus glanced at the thick stack of documents still sitting in the man's briefcase. They weren't just offering him a scholarship. They were offering him something bigger, something that felt like stepping onto a path he couldn't return from. He thought about his life, his neighborhood, the way people ignored kids like him. He had never been special before last night. Would this change things? Would it really help him? Or would he just become part of something he didn't understand? His grandmother reached for his hand, her grip warm and steady. "Whatever you decide, baby, you don't have to do it alone." Marcus took a deep breath. He was standing at a crossroads, and whichever path he took would change everything. Would he step into a world of power and influence? Or would he walk away? What do you think Marcus should do? Let's discuss in the comments. Days later, Marcus stood in front of a massive corporate building, its glass windows reflecting the sky above. The towering structure seemed to stretch endlessly, a world away from the streets he had grown up on. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his fingers gripping the strap of his backpack. This was it. A new chapter. One he had never expected. The scholarship was his. That alone was enough to change his life. But it was clear now, this was about more than just an education. He wasn't just a kid from the neighborhood anymore. He was stepping into something bigger, something he didn't fully understand yet. Evelyn Sinclair had made sure of that. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see his grandmother standing there, giving him that reassuring nod she always did. But this part of the journey was his alone. He had made the decision, and now he had to see it through. Taking a deep breath, he walked forward, the automatic doors hissing open as he stepped inside. The lobby was unlike anything he had ever seen. Marble floors stretched in every direction, chandeliers hung high above, and people in sharp suits moved with purpose. He felt out of place. Then he heard her voice. "Marcus." Evelyn stood near the elevator watching him with a small smile. "Welcome to your future." Marcus hesitated before walking toward her. "I didn't save you for reward," he said quietly, his words barely louder than a breath. She nodded. "I know, but maybe. This is bigger than just you." Marcus looked around once more. This wasn't his world. Not yet. But he had made his choice, and he was ready to see where it led. As they stepped into the elevator, the doors slid shut, enclosing him in a world that still felt foreign. He glanced at his reflection in the polished metal walls, barely recognizing himself. The boy who had once only worried about getting home before dark was now standing in a place where billion-dollar deals were made. It felt surreal. Evelyn pressed a button, and the elevator began to rise. "You're going to have access to opportunities most kids never even dream of," she said. "But it won't be easy. People will have expectations. They'll watch your every move. Are you ready for that?" Marcus exhaled slowly. He wasn't sure if he was ready, but he had already taken the first step. "I guess I'll find out." The elevator dinged as they reached the top floor. When the doors opened, Marcus stepped out into a grand office space, the view of the city stretching endlessly before him. He walked to the window, taking in the sight. Everything looked different from up here, smaller, quieter, distant. He thought of his grandmother. of the neighborhood he had left behind, of the life that had shaped him. He wasn't leaving it behind. He was bringing it with him. Turning back to Evelyn, he squared his shoulders. So, what happens next? Evelyn smiled. We change the world. Marcus felt the weight of those words settle over him. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he was ready to embrace it. What's the biggest lesson from Marcus's journey? Let's discuss in the comments.